This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're talking to journalist Anastasiia Lapatina. She's from Ukraine. She's been documenting the situation with the war, specifically looking into the situation with refugees, civilians being killed in the midst of the Russian invasion. Now the Russian invasion, the war in Ukraine, has been going on for a month. We're going to talk to Anastasiia and find out what the situation is right now on the ground. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront or popularfront.co/support. So now, as of a couple of days ago, the war in Ukraine is now a month old. Essentially, Russia's invasion of the country and war on it is now a month old. I was hoping you can just kind of give us a brief idea at the top of what the situation is like now in Ukraine. We've seen all the footage. It's horrific. Children are dying. Cities are being flattened. But just give us an idea of, the kind of feeling in Ukraine right now, where it's at.
Well, the very, very general feeling is that, of course, the Russian offensive isn't going as well as they planned, nearly not as well as they planned. They are not really having any huge success in any of the directions they're trying to kind of occupy the country. So the only really catastrophic situations are in Mariupol. And then, of course, there has also been a lot of destruction in the east. So along the front line that we've had since 2014 with the occupied territories of Donbass, there have been a few towns that have been occupied. Then there has been the little village of Volnovakha that's just been completely razed to the ground. Pretty much everyone has been evacuated, all houses destroyed. Really horrific, really heartbreaking stuff. And then the only real success has been in Kherson as well, if you can even call it that, because the Russians technically occupied the country, but then, sorry, not the country, the Russians technically occupied the city. That's the city in the very south, so close to Crimea, which is the reason why they were able to do that, right? Because they don't have a lot of land there to go through. But there has still been pretty much daily demonstrations in the city. So what everyone is saying is that just kind of having tanks in town isn't enough. You have to actually control the ground and kind of work with the population. And we're not seeing that anywhere. And then they've also been able to kind of occupy little villages from Kherson to Donbass. There is this little kind of land, piece of land that they've wanted to control for a while, just because it's easier for them to move their military equipment from Crimea towards Kherson and to Donbass as well. So that's kind of that little land bridge that they've been able to get somewhat of a control of. But other than that, of course, then there is Mariupol, which everyone keeps talking about because it's just a horrific scene. It's one of the largest cities in Ukraine, and it was a beautiful city. It was an amazing city. I visited it for the first time in November last year. It's been a very developing city because it was right after Russia invaded the east and annexed Crimea in 2014. The Ukrainian government has kind of tried pouring a lot of money into these towns that are near the front line to kind of make it kind of a sign or make it, kind of a show of like, hey, this is kind of what Ukraine looks like. And then if you compare it to Donetsk, which has been occupied for over 8 years and is completely destroyed, they've been kind of trying to give this comparison of like, if you look at Mariupol, choose Ukraine because this is the level of life you're going to get. And that's exactly what Mariupol was. It was a very beautiful city, a lot of new infrastructure, a lot of new buildings, and Russians completely destroyed it in the last month. And when I say completely, I mean it, because there has been 0 houses that haven't been completely destroyed or
zero.
Zero. There are 0 houses in Mariupol that haven't been, bombed. So a lot of them are either completely burnt to the ground or just, somehow damaged. And then people there for weeks have been without electricity, without water, with very minimal food. There are no stores that are open. It's basically, Mariupol has been sieged and it's in complete occupation under constant bombardment. It's very difficult in a way to get a lot of information out of there, just because there has been no mobile connection, barely any internet. So it's not like people can, sit there and post photos of what's happening. But people have been evacuating, and journalists, including myself, have been able to, find those people and talk to them. And it's truly horrific, because the things they describe are, it's very difficult to talk about this, because I'm Ukrainian myself, but, the government just said in the last few days that people have literally been dying of hunger there. So it's extremely difficult to evacuate anyone, because Russia has been blocking all of the evacuation convoys, both buses going into the city to evacuate and then also going back. But still slowly, 1,000 people here, 1,000 people there, we've been able to evacuate some, but the scale of the catastrophe is still huge. And I think the official numbers of people who've been killed are something around like a few hundreds or a few thousands. I'm not entirely sure, but the point is that those numbers are not really correct, because what everyone else is saying is that the numbers are definitely in tens of thousands, just because from what everyone, like all of the witnesses, people who got out, are saying is that you walk around and there are just dead bodies everywhere. Mariupol has become this just huge cemetery. There are crosses on, in yards of different apartment buildings where people have been just trying to bury people somehow. But the bombardment has been just so nonstop that, it hasn't really been possible in many parts of the city. So there are just dead people, dead bodies everywhere. And there's no way to count them, of course. It's just this horrific situation. It's a huge catastrophe. They pretty much just razed Mariupol to the ground. A lot of people are comparing Mariupol to Aleppo, to Grozny in Chechnya, and it kind of that kind of is exactly what it looks like right now, and it's heartbreaking to see.
It does look like Grozny. It does. It actually does. I saw some footage earlier, and it's like before and after, and it's a drone shot, and the place is just razed.
Completely, yes. There's just these. And it's not even, of course, no one reasonable still thinks that Russia isn't really targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. It's just foolish to think that, because there are all of these photos of apartment blocks just burning, all of them, like these 9-story buildings with people running out of them with kids and trying to grab their belongings, and the entire building is just on fire. And that's pretty much what happened to entire Mariupol. It's really this one huge catastrophe, and we're gonna have to deal with that somehow after the war. And it's very difficult to talk with people who get out of there, because the people I've spoke to haven't been very hopeful, of course, because of all the atrocities they witnessed. And you have to try, because of course, I'm a journalist, but I'm also, first of all, just a human being, right? Like, yes. I want to tell something to them to make them feel better. And especially when it's kids, you try to tell them that Ukraine is going to rebuild all of it, and Ukraine is going to make it look even 10 times better than before. And I really try to, hold on to that thought. And regardless of how realistic that is, I think that's the only way all of us Ukrainians can get through this, is by holding on to the fact that when this is over, we're just going to rebuild back better.
Whereabouts are you from in Ukraine, Anastasia?
I was born in Kherson, actually, the city that's occupied right now.
Right.
My entire city is from there. I moved when I was around 1 with my family, and from then I've been in Kiev. So usually when people ask me where I'm from, I say that I've lived in Kiev my whole life. It's of course very heartbreaking to see what's happening to Kherson, because I've spent, all of my summers as a child there. I know the city very well. I still have a lot of family friends and a lot of family members there as well. But at the same time, it's also amazing to see, the protests and the demonstrations and the resistance. And for 80 years, Ukrainians have been telling, everyone, all of those quasi experts who've been making this conflict and Russia's war, about language or about cultural ties and, all of that crap. None of that really matters to Putin. And I love seeing places like Kharkiv, a city that's majority Russian speaking, places like Kherson, a city that's also majority Russian speaking, just completely telling Putin to, fuck off, and showing and being as patriotic towards Ukraine as they can ever be, and just kind of breaking those myths about, some sort of sympathy towards Russia. Because, to be fair, the one thing that Putin has succeeded in is really solidifying Ukrainian identity right now. So that makes me really proud.
I think it's ironic that he, before this, said that there is no Ukrainian identity. And it's like, well, now that identity is very fiercely fighting the invasion. I've seen it everywhere, there's this is why I explain to people there's everything. Yes, there's a lot of focus on the far right Nazi problem, which is a problem, but there's also Muslims, Jews, just average unpolitical people, anti-fascists. Like, there's everyone fighting right now. I was speaking to a graphic designer the other day who's like, yeah, I'm now a soldier, basically.
It is very insane. And I actually saw something great on Twitter yesterday. This one guy, who's an activist, wrote that everyone has to understand that Ukrainians are, first of all, a political nation. So being Ukrainian isn't an ethnic thing, right? Because we have Crimean Tatars, we have, as you said, Muslims, Jews, all sorts of, religious confessions, all sorts of ethnicities. A lot of people who are also ethnically Russian, like my best friend, like many people I know who are, half Russian, half Ukrainian, or just fully Russian and just happen to live in Ukraine. They all feel very Ukrainian. My boyfriend is Irish, but he considers himself Ukrainian because he's lived here for so long, and he's also fighting in territorial defense right now. And exactly, yes. So Ukrainians are a political nation, and it's very important to understand that this isn't about blood or race, or when people talk about nationalism in Ukraine. This is really just about our survival, because for centuries our entire history is just us fighting off the Russians, and of course other countries and other states, but mostly the Russians, right? They've deported us, they've slaughtered us for many various reasons. They staged the famine that killed millions of people. So this really isn't about, I'm Ukrainian because I'm ethnically Ukrainian. I'm Ukrainian because I value democracy and I value freedom. And we will never go towards the path that Russia has chosen, or arguably has been forced into as well. So yeah, that's very important to understand.
Yeah, and I think it's quite easy to understand outside of these like hyper online political arguments. It's like you're talking about a massive nation has just invaded another nation. It's really quite simple in that respect. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, yeah, of course everyone's gonna go, what the hell are you doing? We're gonna fight. But I don't think many people perhaps realized how fierce the resistance would be there. Can you give us an insight into why you think it is that so many people have willingly just gone and joined and are fighting? Because I'll be honest, if the war like that came to my country, I very much doubt that many people would join up to fight. Not saying that's good or bad. I just don't see it, like culturally, I don't see it. Can you give us some kind of insight into why you think that is? Like, why have the people seemingly been so united in the fight against it? Not just because, it's defending their houses, but there's got to be something culturally there.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, especially in comparison to Russia, because everyone is kind of comparing the two nations and the cultures right now. I think, of course, so I think a part of it is the fact that, as I've mentioned earlier, our entire history is just us trying to survive and us trying to prove to the world and to Russia specifically that we are a nation that deserves independence. We're a nation that deserves democracy and that's going to fight for it. And we've had it taken away from us so many times that we've kind of just lived in the spirit of survival. We've always been fighting. We've always been a nation that had to fight for its democracy. And then, of course, there is the fact that we've had, so many revolutions, right? There was the revolution on granite, then there was the Orange Revolution, then there was the Revolution of Dignity, which the Revolution of Dignity in 2014 was really something that, the Maidan, that was a very important point that led to this moment as well. Of course, strictly, historically speaking, because that's when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, but also because that revolution really touched everyone. I've been, we've interviewed many people who've been involved, and we've also all been parts of these events. And that revolution was kind of like, an awakening for our nation. That's when everyone realized that, we have something to fight for. We want to be a part of Europe. We want to be a part of NATO. We want to be a part of the West. We want to be a free democratic country that can go and protest in front of the president's office for LGBT rights and not be arrested and beaten up. And the most important thing is that we got that, of course, not the NATO accession and the EU accession, but we've got the democracy, because we're a very, very democratic country, especially comparatively to all of our neighbors, and especially compared to, Belarus and Russia. The fact that we were able to overthrow Yanukovych was this just huge victory for us. And after that, I've been always joking that we are going to go and rally for anything. We have all of these little Maidans. I mean, any law that we don't like, you will see crowds of people near the president's office. Anything, from prosecution of activists, which has also happened, of course, because, Ukraine is still not a perfect country, and there was a lot of corruption and a lot of shady things happening in the judicial system. But people really understood that when you don't like something about your government, you go and you fight for it, and you get the result that you want. And we've been able to do that. And that brought the unity of a remarkable scale. And then, of course, I'm not, I am Ukrainian, so I'm biased, but you say that, in your country, you don't think the response would be the same. But to me, I don't see how the response could be any different, because they're bombing the entire country. I mean, like, I'm in Lviv, and I thought that this is really one of the safest places in Ukraine, and it is. And still, despite all of that, yesterday, I was in a bomb shelter for 4 or 3 hours, I don't remember, because there were missile strikes on the city just a few kilometers away from me. That's as Western in the countries it could get, really. We're like a few dozen kilometers away from NATO, from Poland. So I think when you see an attack of such a scale, for Ukrainians, there was never another option. We just kind of realized that, wow, we've always been under attack, but this is an unprecedented, level of danger. So the level of unity also has to be unprecedented to match that and to fight that off.
Yeah, I think you made a great point there. I always really admire how Ukrainians will just get out on the street and be like, absolutely not, like, the government can't do this. Not even Maidan. It's like, like you said, anything that happens, I was keeping a close eye on it. Yeah, like, I have a lot of Ukrainian friends, and I was keeping a close eye on it, because whilst I think what Zelensky is doing now is very brave, and I admire him for staying put, whereas a lot of leaders would flee, I fucking know that British government will be out in a second. But before all this, there was a lot of, I was keeping an eye, and I thought he's doing some dodgy stuff, limitations on freedom of speech, stuff like that. And I know that Ukrainians were out on the streets all the time for stuff like that. You know what I mean? I thought that was quite admirable. Do you think then it's kind of like the militia culture that was not born out of, it was already there, but kind of revived after the Maidan? Do you think this is just like the next step of that kind of militia, do it ourselves culture, like the reason that so many people are resisting right now?
I'm not sure it's do it ourselves necessarily, because that in a way implies the fact that the government isn't doing it. So screw you guys, we're gonna go pick up arms and just do.
No. But as an A side, like, we'll do it too.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a much different way to put it. Yes, I think, of course, during the Revolution of Dignity, and when the war in Donbas began, we've seen a lot of volunteer battalions. We've seen a lot of people joining and fighting for our country. And this is just a continuation of that. And to be honest, although I just a few minutes ago explained to you that, it totally makes sense, looking at our history, but I was also quite amazed to see at the level of unity, because it is really everyone, as in quite literally everyone in this country is doing something to help. And I would talk to any of my girlfriends when the war began, and all of them would just say that their boyfriends, their brothers, their husbands, their fathers, they've all tried to join or joined, and that they all went to fight. And what another interesting thing is that the women aren't even trying to kind of, beg their men to not go, because that's kind of what you'd expect, right? Because you're so terrified that something can happen to your loved ones. But I chat to my friends, and all of them are like, yeah, they're doing it, and they're heroes, and we support them. And there is fear, but fear is really overshadowed and overtaken by pride and by hope that we're all in this together. So it's really a remarkable level of fighting back, and which is why I think I heard something great on CNN the other day. Petraeus, David Petraeus, the American general, was commenting on the situation, and he said that people like to just assign easy numbers to this military situation. They like to say, oh, Russia has got 200,000 troops and Ukraine has 100,000 troops. But he says that's actually not correct, because Ukraine has 100,000 and every other adult in the country. Absolutely. And I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So yes, this is going to be potentially a long, treacherous, very bloody war, but there's no other way for it to end than for us to win.
Yeah, I never thought I'd agree with him, but he is right in that sense. The people are not having it.
I'm gonna abstain from commenting on that.
Yeah, it's wise. Yeah, don't be a loudmouth like me. But yeah, one thing I was looking at that you've been reporting on is like the civilian side of this. Obviously, Popular Front, we're very interested in military side of things, conflict, combat, but also ultimately the biggest problem here is just so many civilians being killed. Very, very clearly, Russia, it's in their rules of engagement to attack civilians. Anyone denying that is frankly just lying, or not aware. Maybe talk to us about that. Yes. What's the situation there with the civilian side of things? I think over 2 million people have left, many people just getting killed. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we see the biggest numbers we see are in relation to, internally displaced people. So we've got more than 10 million, I think, were the latest UN numbers.
Oh, wow.
That have been internally displaced. So not all of them left the country. I think around 3 to 4 million, if I'm not mistaken, have left. The majority of them to Poland, which has welcomed them with open arms and is providing remarkable support as well. I've reported from the Polish border. So we've got just millions of people. That's pretty much the quarter of the country, fleeing their homes and trying to resettle elsewhere. And the heartbreaking thing is that because now they're targeting Lviv as well, there's really no safe place in the country. Of course, there are some remote villages, in the mountains, in the Carpathians close to Lviv that really have no military infrastructure, no anything around them. So those, yes. But in terms of big cities, I remember thinking yesterday when the attack happened that I just met this family from Mariupol who I was interviewing for a story. And, I was listening to these just heartbreaking witness accounts. And then a few hours later, I hear the sirens, and then I see the news about missiles hitting, and I just start thinking about those kids and that family and that mother who just has gone through this horrible journey to evacuate, came here, and she's hoping for safety, and then the city is getting attacked again, and she has to hide in the bomb shelter again and realize that she's traveled all across the country, just to see, more attacks. And that's just been really scary. The realization that there are very few places in the country where you can be relatively safe is scary. I mean, frankly, no one is safe anywhere. I think it's extremely annoying when people ask Ukrainians these days, are you safe? I hope you're safe. No one is safe.
Yeah.
No one is safe here. So that's in terms of internally displaced people. And then, of course, something that I've been following, though it's been very difficult because, of course, the situation changes all the time, is the deportation that Russia is doing. So in Mariupol, we've got around 20,000 people, though it's difficult to tell again because the connection with the city has just been completely cut off. But the authorities said that Russia is basically, they call it evacuation, but of course, it's sort of like deportation. They're taking people on buses, transport them to the occupied territories of Donbass. And from there, they kind of go through these, what people have referred to as filtration camps. So their documents were taken, their phones were taken. Russians are pretty much collecting data on who these people are. Sometimes they don't return those items too. And then they send people to Russia, to places like Taganrog, which is not that far from the Ukrainian border. It's in the north of Russia. Sorry, not northwest. And to other cities. And there has even been reports from the authorities about some Ukrainians being offered jobs on Sakhalin, which is an island, I don't even know how many kilometers away. That's near Japan,
What?
Like that's, yeah. It's this island, Sakhalin, that's near Japan pretty much. And Russia is deporting Ukrainians there, saying that they're offering them jobs. And what the authorities are saying, yeah. And the authorities are saying that that people are offered jobs and then they sign contracts for a few years, to be able to work permits to be able to work there. And then allegedly those permits don't let them leave that region of Russia for 3 years, I think. So, it's really difficult to see the full picture, of course, because we get these little bits and pieces.
To me.
Pretty much, yeah. It's this extremely Stalinist kind of vibe, which has been terrifying to see. Everyone is talking how wow, is this really, the 30s, the 40s, we're really having people go through filtration camps and then sent to Far East regions of Russia. I thought we got over that. But, the fact that Russia is doing this again is just horrific. And then today there has been reports of children, locals in Donetsk, Donetsk is occupied by Russia, and locals are saying that they've seen just these groups of children arrive out of nowhere. They don't have parents with them. They're just there. And then allegedly, if, local authorities, these self-proclaimed republics or whatnot, that are entirely controlled by Russia, of course, if they can't find any relatives for these children, if those children don't have any family there, they just send them to Russia as well. And no one really knows the fate of these kids. So we're just seeing this mass displacement of Ukrainians. And it's horrifying. It's horrifying because it's very difficult to find more information about this. And it's horrifying because when this ends, we're going to have to deal with this problem, right? But we're going to have to find those people, bring them home, resettle them. And what that's going to look like, no one really knows. So it's very scary and it's growing day by day.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Ukrainian, was telling me that just before the war and then even as it started, he was kind of monitoring some pro-separatist Telegram channels, and even the separatists that live there, even the ones that, they're pro-Russian, they were saying Russia doesn't care about us. It's very clear. We're just being used. I do think that's, I think that's quite, observant of them. But I've not seen a lot of talk from the separatist regions since the war started. What have you seen? Have you seen anything? The leaders, what's going on? Are they being used in combat? What's the issue? What's the situation?
I haven't actually been following that region pretty closely. There actually hasn't been that much information coming from the government, especially in the first few weeks of the war. I know that a lot of my colleagues have been kind of trying to figure out what's happening there because there hasn't been as much info or as much focus as in Mariupol or Kharkiv or Kiev. The one development that I did see is that they're trying to host, the self-proclaimed so-called leaders of these republics, which are of course just Russian puppets. They've been saying that they're trying to host a referendum to basically make those republics, Luhansk People's Republics and Donetsk People's Republics, be a part of Russia. So, kind of like a Crimea situation where there are a bunch of people with guns and they're making a show that kind of looks like a referendum, but is of course completely illegitimate. So that's kind of an expected development. I mean, a lot of people have been talking that they're gonna make those territories part of Russia even before the war began, but they didn't. So this is in a way expected, but of course it's gonna also give a lot of it's gonna give more opportunity for Russia to spin lies, and even more troops and make themselves look more legitimate to their local population. Because to be honest, that's what this is kind of all about. Well, that's a very overreaching statement, but I've been thinking about this. We've had a few journalists kidnapped, and a lot of them have been killed. I think we have like 11 journalists killed already in Ukraine, which is horrific. Yeah, but this one journalist who worked for Hromadske, she was kidnapped, and of course she was treated horrifically, but I'm pretty sure she didn't sustain any heavy injuries. There wasn't really anything, horrific done to her. But they did want her to record a video, saying that, they treated her well, and then, just kind of spinning lies about the conflict. And it's interesting to see that all they care about is to have something to show to the locals, Like the Russian regime just needs to sustain, they need to keep sustaining this lie for the local population. They need to continue spinning what's happening here, which is why, they've been in a way using journalists for that as well. But it's just, it's very interesting to see, because of course no one in the West believes a word Russia is saying, but all they care about is that people in Russia believe it,
Something that I keep thinking about in regards to like the kind of propaganda, it's not really that relevant, but it really signified to me where they were going with it before the war started, or at least this phase of it. I mean, let's not forget it's been going on for 8 years in the East. But before the war started, Russia was putting on TV, on like state propaganda news, saying that, the territorial defense, which a lot of them were training with, they're training with like wooden guns, because that's what happens when you train if you don't know how to use a weapon, sort of thing. And they were like, the Ukrainians don't even have enough weapons, like, isn't that funny? And it's like, I think Ukraine is literally right, it's like the 5th most armed country on earth, I think, with like 44 million people in it. And it's like, who, like, what? And obviously that now has been proven to be completely and utterly false. Within a week, we saw like arms just being given off the back of trucks. That's very, very clear that that's not the case. But yeah, that to me just really sticks in my head. And it's like, yeah, if they're carrying on with that level of, bullshit, and all the only.
I mean, a few days ago, sorry to interrupt you, but this is just outrageous. A few days ago, the Russian TV said that because some Russians have been protesting with the slogan "Нет войне," which is no to war, or no war. So a few days ago, the Russian state TV decided that slogan, "No war," is actually a Nazi slogan. So,
right.
I mean, every day that I watch this and I see these lies, every day I think this can't get any worse. I mean, this really can't get any more Orwellian. I mean, they're arresting people for standing there with a blank piece of paper. But every day they somehow manage to make the situation even worse. And if there is one thing they're good at, it's lying. So, yeah, it's very clear that our military is just, even when you compare there's like Russian soldiers to our territorial defense guys, everyone has been talking about how our guys, who a lot of them like don't even really have experience fighting, they just joined territorial defense, and they've been given all of this armor, and they've been given all of this uniform, and they look sick, they look like amazing soldiers who you can trust. And then you see these Russian soldiers who've been given food that's been expired for years, and they barely have any, they can barely communicate because they have these huge communication problems, which is why they've been stealing phones from Ukrainians who are trying to evacuate. So that talk about resources, military resources, that's obviously all a huge lie.
Yeah, I mean, even just statistically, they cannot sustain the losses. I mean, obviously, no disrespect, but the Ukraine government has been saying the losses are a lot higher than they are. But even if, the number is somewhere in the middle of what the Russians and what the Ukrainian state has been saying, it's absolutely massive either way, at least 10,000. They just cannot sustain them losses. Like statistically, it's just not possible. You know what I mean? I think that's now why, I don't know if you saw it, I imagine you did. They're saying now that the first phase is over, and now they're gonna focus on, I think they're kind of splitting the country in half. Maybe you can explain that to us. What are they on about there?
Because a few days ago, they said that, they actually never intended to occupy, large cities like Kharkiv, Kyiv, and others. And their only goal was to, kind of take over Donbass and demilitarize and denazify us there. All of that is obviously bullshit, because literally like the next day or even the same day, they bombed Lviv, which is a few kilometers away from Poland, a few dozen kilometers away from Poland. So of course, those are just more lies, but also you never know what's going on in their heads. But that could signify that they're finally coming to terms, at least a little bit, that this whole thing is kind of going terribly wrong for them. Which is interesting to see. And I've been thinking a lot about that when I've been seeing news about, like kind of this clearance going on in Putin's close circle, how he's replaced like hundreds of his own staff, as in like not staff from the security services, but his personal, staff, because he's so paranoid that something can happen to him, how he's been targeting, members of security services for providing him wrong intelligence. Like, obviously there's something shaky going on in the Kremlin, and it makes Putin look extremely paranoid and extremely worried, which is not something we see often, if ever. So that's been very interesting to see as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've also seen a few oligarchs that were very close to Putin, one of his main architects of the kind of Kremlin empire, if you like, turn up in Istanbul, and he's kind of left, so something's happening.
Yeah, and also Turkey said just today that if Russian oligarchs come to Turkey, that they're gonna something like welcome them with open arms, or they're just gonna accept them and not, not kind of punish them or kick them out in any way. Which, of course, says so much about Turkish politics.
Yeah. Let's not get off topic, but I agree. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I am no fan. Yeah. I think it would be disingenuous to talk about this situation without at least bringing attention to the fact that whilst the denazification thing is ridiculous, I've said it, I've been to Ukraine many times. It's a people of 44 million. Of course, there are Nazi people there. It's Eastern Europe. And actually, if anybody watches the documentary Credit for Murder by, I think, Vladi Antonovich, they will see that Russia has a way bigger problem with militant Nazism. They literally had possibly FSB-backed neo-Nazi serial killing gangs, more than one. Like, if people do 10 minutes research, it's very clear. However, there is a problem in Ukraine with neo-Nazi battalions. We have seen them. Many of them are gaining steam. What are your thoughts, as a Ukrainian, on seeing that? I think it would be rude or disingenuous to not actually ask you. Obviously, I know you are not a neo-Nazi, but it is there. It can't be ignored. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are actually kind of very opposite of yours, is that we really should ignore this problem. Because I genuinely do not think that, the quote unquote problem with the neo-Nazis that we allegedly have in Ukraine is worth the attention that it's getting, because this has really been pissing off Ukrainians in Ukrainian media and journalists like myself. The fact that Western media has been paying so much attention to these allegedly very far-right radical groups, because the matter of fact is they're extremely marginal. I mean, these people are like, maybe, hundreds or a few thousands of people in a 44 million nation. And some far-right political parties that have been talked about in the media, some of them have literally advocated for same-sex marriage, and they're just very kind of liberal parties. So I really don't think I don't think it's fair to say that Ukraine has a problem with the far right, because the truth is there are multiple European countries where the problem with the far right is much greater, and the truth is we are a democratic nation, and we have a lot of people with very different opinions, just like any other democratic nation would. So I think the fact that people are paying attention to this alleged problem, it really just helps the Kremlin, which, I mean, I'm not a fan of that argument, because the Kremlin is going to spin. The Kremlin is going to spin anything, no matter what we say. But like, there's so much to talk about in this war, and there is so much to talk about in this country, and the presence of the far right really isn't one of them, because they're so marginal. They really do not represent the population. They have pretty much zero influence on the politics. They don't have large presence in parliament. I'm pretty sure the only party, I think we had like a lot of far-right parties unite under one umbrella party, and they've won like a few seats in the parliament, or one, I'm not entirely sure.
It was less than 3%.
They have literally, they have like pretty much zero influence on what's happening in the country. So why is everyone talking about them? There's so much to talk about.
Well, here's my counter argument, right? So I hear what you're saying, and I will say that they're very good, as of particularly, are very good at media, and the media stuff they put out is very, very accessible. It's regular. They've got a lot of money, so that's why they're getting a lot of attention, and it is way outsized than the reality. For example, there are literally, by my count, thousands of anti-fascist fighters now, not just in the one resistance committee battalion, in many different battalions. An anarchist was killed recently as just a part of the standard military. But the problem I see is this, right? So yes, every other European country does have a very big Nazi problem, and worse in a lot of countries, like you said, particularly Russia, particularly Serbia as well. However, they don't have columns of tanks. They're not under the National Guard, and there's no way of spinning it. Azov is a deeply far-right militant group, and many of them are neo-Nazis openly. BBC News ran a piece the other day where they're interviewing two normal, territorial defense, and they actually missed that one of them had an actual SS death head skull patch. That is a Nazi. Now, when there is millions, well, I don't know millions, but hundreds of thousands of Jews, I know it's a very big Jewish population in Ukraine, many of which are fighting and are not as bothered by the Nazi problem as others. But I do think it's relevant to talk about it. It's relevant to acknowledge it. And I've been keeping track of the far right presence. And with the war, it's definitely got bigger, which is understandable because, bad people go and do bad things in war. That's how it works. But there is definitely many battalions popping up. You know what I mean? They have a lot of weapons. I saw a far right group the other day with NLAWs, and it's like, okay, I do think it's relevant to bring up. You know what I mean? The same way that it's relevant, in my opinion, to bring up like Sheikh Mansour Battalion, who literally fought alongside jihadists in Syria. They're in there as well, fighting against Russia. My thing is, war is war, and it's fucking crazy. And that's Ukraine is very specifically a mixed up political place, like you said. But you know what I mean? That's the reporter perspective, like myself. That's why I think it's relevant to at least acknowledge. You see what I mean?
Of course, but my thing is that the media has been doing much more than just acknowledging it. And I hate the phrase the Western media, but I'm going to use this just one time. The Western media really has been spinning it and paying to it like much more attention that it deserves. Well, okay, you said that we have these far right groups that have tanks and weapons. Well, the Azov battalion, if you like, I think they have 3,500 Azov fighters in Mariupol right now. They are the ones who are still there trying to save, whatever hope that's left in the city for people to get out. It's them and a few of our elite Navy SEALs. So they're really the ones who are in the most hellish part of the country, trying to defend whatever it is there that's left to defend. So I think we can have all the discussions we want about, how the Jewish population feels about it, and how bad it is that we have this far right presence. But my thing is that one, they affect our politics. They do not affect our politics whatsoever. And B, yes, they have weapons right now, but they're fighting like hell with those weapons to defend my country. And right now, that's all I care about. When I see them attacking Jews, God forbid, when I see them, doing horrific stuff, I will no doubt talk about it. And I will be honest about how that makes me feel, because I'm as far from being far right as possible, but right now, I really don't see a point, as you said, it's important to acknowledge it. Okay, sure, but why? So we have those people, they have these views, they have access to weapons, they're using these weapons in an incredibly heroic way right now, and that's all I care about. And when I see that their presence in Ukraine is leading to something negative, I will address it. But just them being here, just like there are thousands of people just like them all around Europe, I really don't think it's worth spending that much attention about. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah, no, I understand you. But to answer your question, why? I think it's because, their ideology is absolutely vile, and it led to 6 million people being murdered, gassed to death by, Nazis, the actual Nazi party, not even that long ago, and they took over half of Europe. So I think that's why. But I one thing I will say is, like, I totally understand, if your house is being bombed, you're not going to check the ideology of the people protecting you. You're going to be like, yeah, fucking do what you can. I do understand that. Yeah, totally. And at the end of the day, and I'm sure people will cuss me and say I'm a Nazi or far left or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, war is very complicated and messy. And I totally understand that thing of like, yeah, we need all hands on deck essentially. And like I said, the majority of people fighting are the military, and if they wanted, they could join a neo-Nazi battalion instead, but they're with the military, they're with the Marines, like you said. And certainly a lot of the territorial defense that I've spoken to are just like, the most I speak to is like normal people from Kiev, you know, big cities and that, and they're like, yeah, whatever, we're fighting, it is what it is. So I do understand that, but you know, you have to, I think it was worth raising. You see what I mean?
Of course, I understand. I also know that you've paid a lot of attention to this problem in general in the world. So
Yeah. What do you think is next then in terms of the Ukrainian resistance to Russia? I've seen Zelensky today saying, like, you know, it's quite funny. He was like, get them dusty weapons out of your basements and send them to us, sort of thing. Do you think you're going to see this like continued support from the West, or do you think it's going to dwindle? I've already seen kind of the media coverage is slowing down slightly, which is understandable. But where do you see this headed? You know, as a Ukrainian, you've been there, you've seen all the situations. What do you think is going to happen?
That's actually a fantastic question, which I'm not sure I have a very good answer to. And that's something that's been stressing me just as a Ukrainian, you know, if I take off my journalist hat. I'm not sure I understand how this can end. I'm not sure I understand what Putin's endgame here is. I'm not sure what are the good scenarios and not only good but realistic scenarios, but it does seem like this isn't gonna end very soon. This is probably gonna take another definitely few weeks, probably months. This is probably gonna slow down and be like more, you know, slow, treacherous, but continuous conflict, unfortunately. And of course, the West is going to continue supporting us because we're on their doorstep. You know, we are the West. We are Europe. We are right here. We're the biggest country in Europe. You know, and if we fall, Poland is next. You know, if we fall, other European countries are next. And I think everyone understands this very well. Of course, you know, the Western bureaucrats. It takes time for them to really realize what's happening, and we see it in every conflict. In every conflict, there is. Everyone always screams that the West isn't doing enough. That's just kind of how it goes, unfortunately. And of course, it's disappointing to see as a Ukrainian because there's so much they could be doing. But yes, I think we're going to see this slow down but continue for some time. And we just have to keep up our spirit, and we have to keep up that media presence and keep telling stories of these people and stories of these children who've had to flee atrocities, and just kind of bring the human outlook on this so people really understand that this isn't a subject that just needs to be studied academically or analyzed, you know, in foreign policy circles, but these are real human beings, you know, and this is a quarter of a country that's been displaced and pretty much either had to flee their homes or lost their homes. This is a very human problem that's happening right here, you know, on NATO's doorstep. So I don't think they can ignore it.
No, I think you made a really good point there as well. It's like that the West doesn't ever do enough. We saw it in Syria, we saw it everywhere. But at the end of the day, countries, you know, NATO is not a benevolent entity. It's all about self-security. And I think it's sad, but a lot of people are really realizing that obviously the no-fly zone was never going to happen. You know, it's sad for the people on the ground, of course, but it makes sense in a way. You know what I'm saying? Like for them, from just
there's always a reason behind what the West is doing, of course, which is, you know, when I say or when I agree that it makes sense, it doesn't mean that I think that it's the right thing to do, but I see where they're coming from.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think my point is people need to realize that the states are all about self-preservation and not like, you know, really, you know, it's pretty much how it is. However, that being said, you know, there's a lot of refugees are being taken care of. What's the situation with that right now, you know, in terms of what people need, what people, you know, refugees are, what they're going through? How can people help or at least kind of be aware of the situation right now with the refugees?
So the country that took the most refugees, as I said, is Poland, and Poland has been doing a remarkable job. And I've been at the border. I've been on multiple train stations that where Ukrainian refugees have been arriving, and it's a heartbreaking scene in many ways. But the one thing that strikes me the most that I've talked to people Ukrainian refugees who would literally burst in tears while explaining to me how kind everyone has been to them.
Yeah.
And how thankful they are to how the Poles and just the local population, many of them also Ukrainians, have responded to them arriving. So, and also because I have great interest in the Middle East, I've seen what refugee crises in the Middle East look like.
Yeah.
So, what we have here in Poland really isn't that. And I tell that to a lot of people who kind of, are down or begin to lose hope. I kind of say, as fucked up as it is, there is a lot of potential for it to be much worse.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing in Poland and in other, in other countries like Romania and all over Europe, we see this just kind of huge mobilization. Of course, the further you are from the border, like, if we're talking about Spain, I mean, Spain really doesn't, it's not the same, the geographic location plays a huge role. But in general, the West has responded in a remarkable way to Ukrainian refugees arriving, and it's very heartwarming to see. And I think a lot of people are being taken care of. I mean, when I was in Przemyśl, which is the city close to the Polish-Ukrainian border, I went there to report on the train station where trains are arriving from Lviv, and I saw, people, foreigners. I saw a guy from Denmark just stand there with a sign saying that he has a van and he can take, 10 women and children and drive them to Denmark. Like, Denmark is hella far from that border.
Yeah, so far,
I've seen, and I mean, okay, Denmark, I've also seen people from Italy. I mean, Italy is super far, and they're not even people, affiliated with humanitarian organizations or the Red Cross or whoever. They're just regular folks who are, just an Italian dude who got in his car and was like, I'm going to drive God knows how long to help Ukrainians. And I think that's remarkable. It's amazing to see. It's really amazing to see. We see all these websites where people can post these new websites that have been created to help Ukrainian refugees find accommodations, find work, find all sorts of support. And, we see, I get dozens of messages daily from people from California, all over the US, all over the UK, all over the world saying, hey, I don't know if you're going to see this message, but I have a house in this city in the UK. And if anyone who wants to come, we're willing to host them. And I think that's just fantastic, But again, while all of this is nice, what we really should be doing isn't figuring out how to help refugees. What we should be focusing on is how to stop them from fleeing. We have to end the war and actually solve the problem, and treat the actual root cause of this instead of just, spending billions of dollars on accommodating refugees when, all of them could just go home.
I've been seeing a lot of, we just need peace. And it's like, no, I get the sentiment there. But whilst there's an imperialist invasion going on right now, we kind of need a lot more than peace. We need, a strategic combat, really. You know what I mean? Not to say that I'm advocating for anybody get involved, but it's like you said, okay, peace would be nice, but what, right, stop now and like the country is wrecked and Russians occupy the place? Like it doesn't really work like that.
No, it does not. It really does not. And all of these, pacifists and experts have been advocating for peace, whatever the hell that means in the circumstance.
Yeah.
Again, we as Ukrainians really disagree with all of that, because the only admissible peace here is Ukraine's victory. And this is just because that, there has been this quote, I don't know who said it or where this came from, but it's all over Ukrainian social media about how if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war anymore. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that explains it exactly right and very well, because we just can't afford to, we can't afford to, to make large concessions. We can't afford to stop fighting and try to have some sort of peace where obviously Russia is really not going to ever withdraw and they're going to make this into frozen conflict, like, no, none of that is acceptable, and none of that will happen. again, and Zelensky and his administration know very well that if they do something like this, if they say no to NATO, if they say no to the EU, if they give in into these stupid security guarantees, which are just fabrications by Russia, Ukrainians will, I mean, I don't even know how to describe what is going to happen, if the administration goes that way, because Ukrainians will never accept it.
No,
and I remember talking to a Russian friend of mine, not a friend, just a person in Russia I know, and he was saying how like it's so cool because in Russia people really separate themselves from the government, and he's like, as long as I've lived outside of Russia and in Russia, I've always hated the government. I've always disliked them. I've never voted for them. I've always wanted for them, for this to be over. Whereas in Ukraine, we really see ourselves as one with the government, and we always have, So if the government is doing something wrong, we really take it as like, okay, we got to act because this is our responsibility. And Russia really doesn't have that, whereas Ukraine does. So if Zelensky and his administration do something, that we don't like, people are going to make them change their course, as we've done many times in the past.
Yeah, I think so. What's the kind of feeling from people in Ukraine towards Zelensky right now? I know in the West, they're turning him into like a superhero, which, not to distract from the guy, like it's incredible that he's staying, and I think he's doing like all the right things, or at least it looks like that. But the West is losing its fucking mind, talking about getting him on the Oscars. Let's make a Zelensky fucking Funko Pop, like this pathetic kind of man-child vibe. But what's the actual reaction, in Ukraine? What are people actually saying about him? How do they feel about how he's handling this?
Oh, it's pretty much the same. I mean. We're all just are behind him, and we're all supporting him as much as we can. And of course, a part of this is just situational, right? Like when there is a war and when there is a direct threat to you, again, you turn to unity and you just kind of get close with your people and try to support them as much as possible. But also part of it is, Zelensky has been doing remarkably well, and his daily speeches that he's giving, kudos to his speechwriters. Those speeches have been amazing. Those are literally national therapy. I mean, and I never thought I'd say this, but when the war began, I would genuinely, for like a few weeks, I'd listen to his speeches daily, and they genuinely calmed me down. It works. But yeah, it's the same. It's the same. He has remarkable levels of support. Everyone sees what he's doing. Everyone sees the messages that he's sending, and we're behind him. And any criticism of his government, any criticism of whoever on the Ukrainian side is going to be done after the victory, because we'll understand that this isn't the time for internal quarrels.
Yeah, I think that's something the internet, critically online sphere, are not realizing, that pragmatism is the most useful tool in a time of war like this.
Yes. There have been many wars around the world that have gone remarkably wrong because of internal issues of a particular side. And I'm very glad to see that Ukrainians are learning that lesson and are really putting behind all of those issues and are trying to focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's defeating Russians, and you see it very quickly. One, I guess, famous person and one activist or one journalist says something that even a little bit, paints Ukrainians in a negative side, or the government. Everyone comes back and they're like, guys, just quit it, just remember what this is about. Remember that we have to win. We have to save our nation. We have to protect our democracy, and whatever else are the problems, we're going to deal with it later. It's not that we're ignoring them. It's not that we're saying that, suddenly our government became fantastic and perfect, but it's just the timing. We have to be focused on one thing, and we're going to deal with everything later. And I think that's an absolutely correct approach right now.
No, totally. I've seen a lot of people, even people I'm friends with online, being like, oh, if I say anything bad about Ukraine, people jump on me. And it's happened to me as well. I'm like, oh, this battalion is fucked up. And people are like, fuck you. And I'm like, yeah, of course they're going to say that. I understand that. It's completely normal and fine. You need national unity to defeat this. It's like, I'm like, lads, don't take it personally. Like, of course, I'd be the same, but it's like, this is our job. That's fine. I think people need to relax. Is there any kind of misconceptions about this war and about Ukraine that you think people, you want to address perhaps?
Well, yeah, I think the one big misconception is, the whole talk about concessions, and the fact that perhaps Ukraine has to kind of give in, and maybe Ukraine can just give up its NATO aspirations, and maybe Ukraine, can give Russia the security guarantees it wants. I mean, those are all non-negotiable, and I mean it literally. Those are really not things that everyone would accept. And even if, which I think Zelensky understands this very well, and his government understands this very well, but if somehow, they manage to go and choose this path of like negotiating with Russia and giving in, Ukrainians will never accept it. We just won't. And I think this is just crucially important to understand. I mean, all of these experts giving Ukraine advices to kind of give in is just useless. We will never do it. And I still think that, that analysis from DC is important. There is a place for it. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a huge humanitarian catastrophe, and there is a war. But we also have to, the governments also have to make politically calculated decisions. And for those decisions, there has to be some analysis and expertise, going on, of course. But it's just been very funny to see. Also, all of these people who talk about how Ukrainians are hating all Russians and how that's wrong, and telling us how we shouldn't feel that way, and how not all Russians are to blame, and all of those things. And meanwhile, I see my friends, my colleagues being like, guys, like our families could die. Like some of our friends have already died. We're living this. We're here. We're hiding from bombs, and you're telling us how to feel. So, but that's always going to be present, of course, in any conflict. There will be experts who are gonna try to impose their opinion.
Yeah, it happens so much in the Middle East as well. People telling this group why they shouldn't take help from that group. Like, man, rockets are raining. Just relax. Also, as well. There's a lot of Russians fighting. I personally know 2 Russians currently on the front line now, anarchists, one of which was in a Russian prison, a dissident fighting the state right now. And I know that the West is kind of spinning this idea that millions of Russians are against Putin, which in a way, I think 70% of the country they're saying are kind of for the war. That's a very big country and a very big percentage that aren't. But ultimately, there is a very big support for the war there, and it's not all Russians, obviously. That's insane. And I do think some of the sanctions, like I saw some ridiculous pet show was deciding they're not going to allow Russian cats in the show anymore. Like, things have gone too far. But like you said, you can't just tell people how to feel when they're in these dire circumstances. I do understand that.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, those companies that are leaving, which seems just like completely unrelated to the conflict or whatever, those are just reputational losses, of course. That's why they're leaving.
Yeah. And also a lot of that stuff, I've been trying to explain to people, like, these companies don't care about Ukraine. It's free PR. Yeah. If they go, no Russian cats, literally it's a free headline, for them. And anyway. Anastasiia, is there anything else you want to say before we go?
Well, I just think that I really hope people don't stop paying attention to this, as idealistic as that sounds, because of course, that's just kind of what happens when wars begin. But I just hope people continue paying attention, and we can continue doing our jobs of, telling people stories, and people will listen.
Definitely. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Where can people follow your work?
Mostly on Twitter. That's where I am at. And also, you guys should read the Kyiv Independent, which is just, the main Ukrainian voice abroad right now.
Definitely. What's your Twitter, just so people know if they want to follow it?
It's Lapatina. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Of course.
That was journalist Anastasiia Lapatina talking about the current situation on the ground in Ukraine now that the new level of the war after the Russian invasion has been going on for a month now. Again, don't forget though, the war in Ukraine has been going on for 8 years now in the east, and now this is just the next stage where Russia has fully invaded the country, targeting civilians, wrecking the place. Really bad situation. If you like what we do here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront or popularfront.co/support. Also, right now we have a new documentary out on our youtube.com/popularfront. It's a documentary covering the largely underreported youth uprising, if you like, in Corsica. If you didn't know, that is a small island off the coast of Italy and France. It's under the control of the French, so it's part of France, but a lot of people on the island for a long time now have not wanted to be a part of France. They either want independence or autonomy. A Corsican political prisoner, Ivan Colonna, was beaten up in a prison in France and he died recently, and the youth are very angry about that, as are a lot of other people. To understand what's going on there, go and watch our documentary. Again, youtube.com/popularfront. Please do share it if you like it and show people what is going on there. Thank you to our sponsors, Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 South West Bond Avenue, 97239. They will probably give you a cheap or free coffee if you tell them Popular Front sent you. They might not, I don't know, but yeah, check them out. Also, thank you to Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South, one in West. Find them on socials at Grindcore House. Go and visit them. The shop looks really, really fucking cool. Check them out, Grindcore House. Also, thank you to Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. You can buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. Thank you very much to them. Follow us on socials, Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfront_. All my socials are at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. For everything, just go to the website popularfront.co. You'll find everything there, links all over the place. There's merch as well, popularfront.shop. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Listen to his music at samblackpf.com. Thank you very much to our high tier Patreons. Now, a lot of people have messaged me saying you didn't read my name out. I didn't mean to. I've noticed there's a real Patreon is very, very buggy. It always has been. They keep saying they're fixing it. They never really do. The app is absolute chaos. It doesn't work properly. And for some reason, the parameters I put in to get everybody's name up has not been working properly. So if I've missed you out, let me know and I will write it down. It's a massive, massive neck ache, but it is what it is. Anyway, thank you to Alex Harvey. Fucking hell. Q loves cake farts. Nicholas Blomberg, Matthew Diffley, Matthew Mendoza, Noah Schmidt, Lisa, Jane Millichip, Claire, Liana, Gavin Thornton, Sean, Christianovich, I think that's how you pronounce that, NTHG, Ethan Zwick, Champagne Anarchist, Thwat, Elise Middlefart, David McManus, Joachim Williamson Holt, Yudoye Travis, Ikta K, I hope I said that right, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, B, Drift, Pete Hesher, RX, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, Shikha Gupta, I think that's right, please tell me if it's not, LD50 Seattle, K Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H, Ryan Barbadillo, Derivative Fool, Larson 8669, Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamondstein, Michael O'Connor, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, TFD, Nicholas Butter, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan, Shanklin the Painter, Fitz Madrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Ben, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Wizard of Woz, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Noah, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochran, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Dunham, Fletcher, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Chester Watts, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Maurice Zumbul. I think that should be all the names actually. I noticed there's more this time, so hopefully the new parameters I put in, which were exactly the same as the old ones, has actually made all the names come up. If not, please do let me know. Thanks for supporting as always. We're doing a lot already this year and we're going to do a lot more. Support us, patreon.com/popularfront. There's loads of extra content there. Cheers.